Welcome back to the deep dive. This time, we've got some legal articles about a case that really got me thinking. The Rene Flores-Avila case. He was convicted, but then, get this, had his convictions overturned on appeal.
Yeah, it's really a fascinating case, especially when you dig into the details.
The whole thing really hinges on this one seemingly small statement made during the trial. I mean, we're talking about a single sentence that ended up changing everything.
Absolutely. It highlights just how crucial every word can be in legal proceedings, how the smallest detail can have a huge impact.
Okay, so before we get into that, can you give us a little background on the case? What were the charges against Flores-Avila?
Sure, so he was convicted of aggravated sexual battery and child molestation.
Heavy stuff. And if I remember correctly from the articles, the victim's mother ended up playing a pretty significant role in the appeal, right? What happened there?
Yeah, that's right. During the trial, the victim's mother testified, and at some point, she said that her daughter doesn't lie and is telling the truth. Now, on the surface, it might seem like a pretty natural thing for a mother to say.
Yeah, I mean, you'd expect a mother to defend her child, right?
Exactly. But here's the thing, in court, that kind of statement is a big no-no. It's actually a specific legal term called improper bolstering.
Improper bolstering. Okay, I'm not a lawyer, so break that down for me. Why is saying something like that such a problem in court?
Well, think about it this way. The whole point of a trial is for the jury to decide who's telling the truth. Right.
That's their job.
Exactly. But when a witness, especially someone close to the victim, essentially tells the jury to just believe the victim, it really messes with their ability to be impartial.
So it's like she's taking over the jury's role, telling them what to think.
Exactly. And that's a huge problem because the rules of evidence are specifically designed to prevent that kind of influence. It's all about ensuring that the trial is fair for everyone involved.
You know, this improper bolstering thing, I have to admit, I'd never even heard of it before reading these articles. But it makes you think, right? Like, how many other little legal quirks are out there that we have no clue about?
Oh, there are tons. It's a whole world unto itself. But yeah, that's why we do these deep dives to uncover these fascinating legal nuances.
So we've established that this statement was a big deal legally speaking. But was this statement the only evidence they had against Flores-Avila? Or was there other evidence presented in the case?
See, that's what makes this case even more interesting. There was no physical evidence at all.
Wow. So the entire case rested on the victim's testimony.
That's right. It was the foundation of the prosecution's case.
Okay. So putting myself in the defense lawyer's shoes for a second, if the mother hadn't made that statement, how do you think they might have approached the case?
Well, knowing that the victim's testimony was all they had, the defense would naturally try to poke holes in it.
You mean try to find inconsistencies?
Yeah, exactly. Anything that could raise reasonable doubt in the jury's mind, they'd be looking for inconsistencies in her statements, anything like that.
But with the mom's statement, it's like she inadvertently made that line of defense much harder, right? I mean, if you're on the jury and you hear the mom saying, "My daughter never lies," you're probably less likely to question the victim's story, even if there are inconsistencies.
That's a really good point. And that's precisely why this improper bolstering became the central issue in the appeal.
Okay, so how did the appeals court ultimately handle this whole situation?
Well, they zeroed in on the defense lawyer's reaction, or rather, his lack of reaction. They basically said that the lawyer should have immediately objected to the mother's statement right then and there.
So in a way, the lawyer kind of missed an opportunity to protect his client.
You could say that. And the appeals court labeled this as deficient performance on the lawyer's part. They concluded that his failure to object was a big mistake, so much so that it might have actually changed the outcome of the trial.
So we're not talking about a little oopsie. We're talking about a potentially game-changing error.
Right. And it all goes back to the fact that the entire case relied on the victim's testimony. And since the defense was trying to cast doubt on her credibility, the mother's bolstering statement could have easily swayed the jury in the prosecution's favor.
It's incredible how one single sentence can have such a ripple effect throughout an entire trial.
Yeah, and it just underscores the importance of every single detail in a legal proceeding, and how crucial it is to have a competent lawyer who knows the ins and outs of the law.
All right, so we've got this deficient performance from the lawyer. But what happened next? Did they just toss out the conviction and set Flores-Avila free?
Not quite. It's a little more complicated than that.
Okay, I'm all ears.
The appeals court acknowledged that there was enough evidence presented to support the initial guilty verdict, but because of that lawyer's mistake, they decided to overturn the convictions and order a retrial.
Wait, hold on. They found enough evidence for a conviction, but they still overturned it.
That's right. And that's because the appeals court's main focus isn't necessarily on guilt or innocence at this stage. They're more concerned with whether the trial itself was fair.
So it's more about making sure the legal process was followed correctly than actually deciding whether he did it or not.
Exactly. And in this case, they felt that the improper bolstering incident tainted the fairness of the trial. The retrial would give both sides a chance to present their case again, but this time without that potentially damaging statement from the mother.
Man, this is getting more and more interesting. Okay, so you keep using this word prejudice. Is that like a formal legal term? I feel like we need to unpack that a bit more.
Absolutely. Prejudice is a key legal concept that helps determine if a mistake during a trial was actually harmful or if it didn't really matter in the end. It's a fascinating concept, and I think it's worth diving into.
I'm all for that. Let's explore prejudice and its impact on the FLORES-AVILA case after we grab a quick drink. I'm parched from all this legal talk.
Sounds good to me. We'll be right back after this short break.
Okay, so right before the break, we were talking about how the appeals court said that defense lawyer really messed up by not objecting to the mother's statement. They even called it deficient performance. But they also kept mentioning this word prejudice. So what does prejudice actually mean in this whole legal context?
Well, prejudice is a super important legal concept. It basically means that the lawyer's mistake, in this case, not objecting, most likely actually affected the trial's outcome. It wasn't just some technicality. It had a real impact on how the jury made their decision.
So it's not enough to just point out a mistake. You've got to show that the mistake really mattered. Is that right?
You got it. It's not just about finding an error, it's about proving that the error actually made a difference. The appeals court had to determine if the mom's statement was just a harmless slip-up or if it actually swayed the jury toward the prosecution.
Makes sense. But how do they actually measure that? I mean, can you really ever truly know what influenced a jury's decision?
Yeah, it's not an exact science, but basically they look at the whole picture. And in this case, remember, the victim's testimony was the only evidence linking Flores-Avila to the crimes. And remember we were talking about earlier, the defense was trying to raise doubts about her credibility, which is totally understandable given that hers was the only testimony. So when the mother came in with that statement, it basically threw a wrench in that whole strategy.
Yeah, it's like she was unintentionally telling the jury, hey, don't even worry about any inconsistencies. You can just trust her.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And especially coming from the victim's mother, a figure most people generally see as authoritative, that statement probably had a lot of weight with the jury. It could have easily caused them to just brush aside any doubts they might have had, maybe even subconsciously.
So it's not about proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that the jury was definitely swayed. It's more about showing that it's very possible that they were influenced by the mistake.
Exactly. And in the end, the appeals court concluded that if the lawyer had objected and the judge had told the jury to ignore the mother's statement, there's a real chance the jury might have come back with a different verdict.
So even though they didn't come right out and say that Flores-Avila was innocent, they realized that he didn't really get a fair trial because of what the mother said.
Exactly. That's why they ordered a retrial. It gives both sides another chance to present their cases, but this time, everything is, at least in theory, fair and square.
This whole thing is really fascinating. It really shows how much effort goes into making sure the legal system actually finds justice, and how much effort goes into making sure the process is fair for everyone involved.
You're absolutely right. All those rules and procedures, even something as specific as this improper bolstering thing, they're all there for a reason. They're meant to protect the integrity of a trial and to make sure everyone involved has a real chance at justice.
This has been such an insightful deep dive. We've learned about improper bolstering and prejudice and how much impact they can have on a trial. But besides all the legal technicalities, what does all of this actually mean for us regular folks who aren't lawyers?
Well, what I think is so interesting about this case is that it has some broader implications for how we evaluate all kinds of information in general, not just in legal settings. Think about it. We rely on witness testimony all the time, not just in courtrooms. We hear stories from friends, we read news articles, we listen to people describing things that happened. It's everywhere.
I see what you mean. We're constantly bombarded with information, and figuring out what to believe is a challenge.
You're right. And this case really highlights how important it is to be a little cautious about accepting anything we hear at face value. It's a good reminder to always consider the source of the information, the context, and if there might be any biases at play that might be shaping what we're being told, whether they're intentional or not.
So it's kind of a lesson in thinking critically, and even about being more careful about what we believe from the media.
Absolutely. Just because somebody says something with a lot of confidence doesn't mean it's true. We need to always be aware of the potential for influence and be critical thinkers about all the information that we're always taking in.
You've really given us a lot to think about today. It's pretty eye-opening to see how these legal principles can apply to our everyday lives.
It just goes to show that the law is way more relevant to our lives than we might think. It's not just about rules and regulations, it's about how we think, how we process information, and how we act in the world.
That brings us to our final thoughts for today. This case showed us how even small details can have huge consequences, but it also showed us how the legal system tries to right its wrongs and make sure things are fair. So, what's the main takeaway you hope our listeners walk away with today? Yeah, it really makes you realize just how much weight we put on people's words, especially when there's not much else to go on. Like in this FLORES-AVILA case, it really got me thinking about how easily we could just take someone at their word.
It's a good reminder that witness testimony, while powerful, is not foolproof. I mean, it can be influenced by so many things, and we have to be careful not to just assume that someone's confidence or their emotions mean that they're telling the truth.
It all comes back to being a more critical consumer of information, like you were saying before. But how do we actually do that? Like, what are some red flags we should be looking out for?
Well, one thing to watch out for is that halo effect we talked about. Just because someone is in a position of authority, like a parent, a teacher, or even, say, a news anchor, it doesn't mean that everything they say is automatically accurate or unbiased.
So we shouldn't just blindly trust someone, even if they seem credible or trustworthy.
Right. It's always a good idea to take a step back and ask yourself, why is this person saying this? What's their motivation? Are they emotionally invested? Could they be trying to protect someone or even themselves? It's all about understanding the context.
That's a great point. Always look for the why behind the what. And what about when we're getting information from the media? Any tips for navigating that?
For sure, when you're reading a news article or watching a report, especially about a trial, pay close attention to how they're presenting the information. Are they only telling one side of the story? Are they using really emotional language that might be trying to sway your opinion?
So be on the lookout for signs of bias or an attempt to play on our emotions.
Exactly. And always keep in mind that media outlets have their own agendas and biases. They might be trying to create a really sensational story or cater to a particular audience.
It's like we need to be detectives, always questioning and double-checking what we see and hear, right?
You got it. By being more aware of these potential influences, we can make better decisions about what we believe and how we form our own opinions.
Wow, this deep dive has been incredible. We've gone deep into a legal case, uncovered some biases we might not have even known existed, and even learned how to be more aware of the information we're consuming in our everyday lives.
And hopefully, it's encouraged our listeners to be more critical thinkers, to question things, to challenge assumptions, and to never stop searching for the truth.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Renee Flores-Avila case and the fascinating world of legal nuances. It just goes to show that even seemingly small details can have massive consequences. And until next time, keep those critical thinking caps on.